Growing up, there's this phrase. It's, as I'm sure you know, where's the clicker? Sorry. An apple a day keeps the doctor away. It always irked me, along with probably a lot of other people. Truthfully, I think it mostly irked doctors, who valiantly fought to prove that apples aren't about to equip you in the face of a car accident. Yet it wasn't until this project I discovered why this phrase felt just so misleading. It's because this is not an apple, and here's why. An apple, in this context, is meant to represent your carrots and your tomatoes and all your vegetables and all your fruits and all those good things that come straight from the ground. It's really intense, and I mean, an apple isn't even all that. This apple, though, this apple's definitely all that. So what's the difference? Because there is a huge difference. Well, these apples had very different upbringings. Apple B was raised by a warm community in the sunshine, with all their nutrients and love. This is awkward. Apple A had a tough childhood. Negligent parents, nobody to tell them to eat their vegetables, and eventually, Apple A got addicted to fertilizer. And I'm not being entirely poetic here. Apple A's parents, the farmers, in case you're not quite there yet, pumped them with synthetic fertilizers, and now Apple A can't function without its daily fix. Eventually, not bothering to get any other nutrients from the soil. Poor Apple A, huh? But Apple B is our story of hope. Apple B's upbringing was amazing, and also doesn't have controlling helicopter parents. So this means that Apple B got to interact with their entire environment, experiencing an array of nutrients and growth, becoming their best selves. Here's Apple A. And here's Apple B. Throughout the presentation, I will add to each poster, and you will see why this apple is just so controversial. I would also like to add that even though Masterworks are hard to get through, you need to use critical thinking skills here. What I'm talking about today isn't purely scientific. At best, I'm trying to put into perspective our food system. Actually, yes, that is what I'm doing. Hi, my name is Harper, and I'm here to talk you through our modern agricultural system. This mic is a little weird, right? Okay, cool. Food is currently one of the biggest determinations of our future. Considering our obscene intake and its production and distribution, there's never been a more critical time to take a long, hard look at our food systems. While not everybody has a healthy relationship with food, that's no longer a valid excuse to not understanding the single biggest contributor to not only our personal health, but humanity's survival and the health of our planet. Practices such as regenerative agriculture are now being more widely discussed and considered, giving a whole new generation hope for not just healthy eating, but a globally healthy lifestyle and connection with the planet. To start, you need a little background into how a plant actually grows. Not surprisingly, crops don't just eat the soil. They interact with a web of microorganisms to access all their needed nutrients. They release around 40% of the sugars they produce as root exudates, which are what attract and feed the soil microbes. In exchange, microbes break down micronutrients, making them easier for the plants to absorb. This underground activity creates a complex soil carbon sponge as a result of earthworm and microbe activity, creating space for root growth, as well as air pockets which aid in water penetrability. Meanwhile, root exudates, also called biotic glues, maintain the structure of the soil. Apple B has a non-toxic, not platonic, but like kind of flirty relationship with these microbes. So they happily thrive on all the nutrients they need. I said Apple B, right? Yeah. That's a little awkward. Okay, these might not stick. You might have to imagine. No, we're cool. We're cool. Okay, arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, AMF from completely now on, is another vital piece of the growing system. It grows underground as hyphae, which are fungi threads, until it comes in physical contact with the plant's roots. They will then begin to grow intercellularly, connecting the plant and AMF. Afterwards, it'll start to grow outwards, acting as an extension of the plant. What is so great is not only the surface area, but although hyphae's small size can access smaller pores of the soil that are beyond the plant's access. This growing system also creates a dense mat that aids in retaining moisture. And according to a search I did just about last Tuesday, this is the same fungi that is responsible for the communication in between plants because of the common ground they all share on this network. Appleby has a very close relationship with AMF, which totally gets them into the it group of hyphae, but also helps them be a better version of themselves. Fungi and the it group. One of the big ideas of this presentation, you could say, is how modern agriculture fails to take into account the complex nature of this growth. Keep in mind, critical thinkers, realize that I explained a very simplified version of what my paper went into, and then realize that I'm one of those 9th grade students that got caught taking cupcakes from the back freezer. So my paper is already oversimplified. The intricacy of this web is so beyond human understanding and equally as complex as we are. Now let me talk to you about the Green Revolution. Around 1950, people were pretty concerned about the exponential population rise resulting in global starvation. You know that graph that Jen shows us in grade 6 about population rise that makes you think she's trying to convince you to not have kids? 1950 was like right there. Uncoincidentally, that was also around the time that factories that manufactured nitrogen for bombs for the war began the search for a replacement product after the end of the war. Fertilizer that contained loads of nitrogen had just been introduced, and said factories began to heavily endorse it. Because adding nitrogen to the war had been so beneficial, I guess they decided, why not do the same with our food? Naturally, it was only years later into this use that farmers began to notice the downsides of this fertilizer. So came the Green Revolution by the 1970s, supported by nitrogen fertilizers, and a movement, primarily started by scientist Norman Borlaug, who is often credited with saving world hunger by developing a more efficient grain plant varieties that relied on chemical synthetic enhancers. But he's also that negligent parent, Apple A's parent. While his efforts were well-meaning and did save millions of people from starvation, his discovery led to the damaging and excessive use of artificial enhancers. This one's really special, one sec. In retrospect, I realized my mistake, but here's pesticides, fertilizers, actually that was herbicides, and here is pesticides. Tilling is the practice of cultivating land in preparation for growing crops, most commonly with heavy machinery. This is often plowing into the soil to break up chunks or flattening and compressing the ground. Now, I was informed that I'm showing too much bias. So I'm opening up the floor for some critically thought out answers on what the consequences, good or bad, both, could be of tilling. And this is like a question period, by the way. Answers, good or bad, of tilling. Yeah, Adrian.
Tilling can open the land so you can actually get seeds in if it's really hard packed.
Yes, that is a good consequence. Stella?
It could kill any small animals or life in the ground.
That is another good consequence. I am looking for variety. Bo?
You grow more and more product and so on.
Okay, that's good, thank you. You guys. Okay, Carrie would really like to go next.
I just have a negative note.
Oh, yes.
The environment released carbon that's sequestered and held in the soil.
Oh my God, no way. When plants become addicted to, oh, maybe not. Remember that lovely carbon soil sponge that was so important to healthy growth? Plowing completely demolishes it, dicing up the structure and eliminating the porous tendencies. So the soil becomes dry and vulnerable to fire and drought, which is obviously a bit of an issue. Another quick recap, carbon is stored in the soil. So when you turn up the soil, it releases the carbon stored. Just to put this all in perspective, one sec. The gas vehicles release carbon as they tear up soil to release more carbon, increasing the need for chemical fertilizers, among other expenses, and increasing fire and drought vulnerability. Plowing is like Shein. It's disgusting and awful for everything but the distribution of the actual product. It's gotten us this far, so obviously something is working out. But the contradiction is that we can definitely be doing better, and the consequences are starting to catch up to us. Another hugely common practice is monoculture. I was supposed to actually slip through this. Monoculture, which is when large portions of land are used to cultivate the same plant, in some cases even the exact same copy of a plant. Up to millions of hectares of land can be used for the same crop, with no diversity. Palm oil, wheat, and cereal products are most often planted this way, as they're the most wide-scale crop productions. I need you to think critically again. Planting the same plant for millions of hectares of land has some very obvious downsides, like how all of the plants are going to use up all of the same nutrients, and then there will be an increased need for chemical enhancers. Or how the lack of diversity will lead to weakened root systems, exposing the topsoil to excessive erosion. On the other hand, I'm also supposed to remind you that we have a lot of people on planet Earth, 8 billion, and monoculture has allowed us to grow enough food to roughly fill all of our bellies. So Applebee gets monoculture. Cute. When plants become addicted to chemical fertilizers, they fail to interact with the microbes around them to access the whole array of necessary micronutrients. While some studies argue there isn't any difference in organic versus non-organic produce nutrients, others suggest that the micronutrients plants accumulate are great benefactors to your own body's microbiome. From 1950 to 1999, studies have shown that nutrients in produce such as spinach or carrots has declined on average by 38%. That means you would need to eat only 2 carrots in the 1950s to get the same amount of nutrients as 3 carrots today. Of the 43 vegetables analyzed in a PubMed study, protein content was minorly reduced, as well as riboflavin and vitamin C acids. Calcium content dropped 16% and phosphorus by 9%. And who here has an iron deficiency? Don't lie. Great. It's increasingly common, and not because you're not taking those iron pills because they're making you sick. It's because those supposedly iron-rich foods are 15% less iron-rich than they were only 50 years prior. In comparison to this theory, there is an American study currently examining the difference in nutrient level compared to microbe content. Their research suggests that because microbes break down the nutrients better, it's easier for the plants to absorb it and transfer it to us when we consume them. First Nations have had relationships with the land since the beginning of time. They interconnect themselves with food, land, relationships, everything. And it's no wonder why today there seems to be a global shift towards their implementation of agriculture. Full circle moment, their knowledge is being renamed agroforestry and permaculture, even if their philosophies, which are embedded in these, have been long practiced. Their connection to the land is arguably why they are so in tune with nature's need. Truthfully, even their harvest practices demonstrate extreme respect for beings outside of themselves. And when Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer, the book, describes them, it's clear why the First Nations have the best understanding of the natural world. Values such as ask permission, listen for the answer, and take only what you need resonate holistically, and yet don't seem to be as meaningful and obvious today. Knowledge such as how the 3 sisters, corn, bean, and squash, grow so well together is a perfect example of their abundance of understanding. This is meant to represent connection, by the way. While many people sidelined indigenous beliefs surrounding agriculture because of their supposed hunter-gatherer lifestyle, new findings in research have found that indigenous peoples in British Columbia actually cultivated land and yields as far as 7,000 years ago. One study found that hazelnuts were distributed far more than natural spreading would cause, suggesting that First Nations intentionally spread and managed hazelnut tree growth. The areas that the First Nations maintained are now called food forests and consist of cultivated natural forest areas. The indigenous would plant, weed, naturally fertilize, and control burn areas to enhance natural growth. Not surprisingly, there was large large social backpedaling in regards to these food forests, as ecologists for a long time argued that these deliberately planted and maintained portions of land were unintentional. Chelsea Armstrong, an ecologist at Simon Fraser University, challenged this notion by going out to villages that were forcibly deserted in the 1800s. They found that the diversity of plants was far greater in areas surrounding the villages. Anyway. Even further, when the areas were logged, the food forests grew back full of life. Sorry, I need a sec. While land farther out from the deserted areas began to grow back sparse. The diversity in plant species is thought to have been the reason why food forests were so much more resilient against invasive species. The wonder in this is hopeful and regretful. Was the best meaningful connection and contribution to nature made by humanity thousands of years ago? Well, yes, but also, did we humans actually and truthfully support nature at one point in time? Also, yes. Now, permaculture is a technique in growing that embraces holistic values while still yielding results, and is a promising in regards of Western understanding of our ecosystem. Permaculture is the philosophy of working with rather than against nature, of protracted and thoughtful observation rather than protracted and thoughtless labor, and of looking at plants and animals in all of their functions rather than treating any single area as a product system. To give you an idea of permaculture, I have a few principles out of the 12, so it's just a few, to represent the intuity of this practice. The first principle is to observe and interact. You have to look at the potential of a space instead of looking for what it already has. The fourth principle is to apply self-regulation and accept feedback. This principle is meant to be selfless. It's key to be able to accept responsibility for mistakes you may have made regarding your space, or even for your accomplishments, especially considering the idea that you don't own the land. And the 10th principle is to use and value diversity. When regarding this principle, you must think about the fact that it is not simply the outcome of a yield or your space that you want to diversify, but your techniques and mannerisms. Cover crops are close-growing, I love that slide. Cover crops are close-growing ground crops. They're intended to preserve the soil in between the planting of major cash crops. Crops, by offering root stability, water absorption, and carbon soil sponge structural benefits. That's not gonna work. In this image, cover crops, as you can see, are being planted when nothing else is necessarily growing. The biggest advantage of cover crops is that because these are used primarily for increasing soil health, farmers can really capitalize on what plants are best for the soil. When visiting the UBC Sustainability Farm, I got to talk about cover crops with one of my external advisors, Jessica Chiartes, and her stance is clear. I just think cover crops are such a win-win, low-hanging fruit that's easy to get growers to adopt, and that has cascading benefits throughout the agricultural system. I'm excited about the fact that they're doing that, and they're actually trying to be able to collect data that proves out these benefits. So obviously, Applebee is going to get some cover crops. Now, considering all this, when you're thinking about the best ways to have a positive environmental impact, the best option has always been to simply reduce. And while you can certainly cut down on food waste, food definitely qualifies as a little more important than those foot baths and those sticky phone thingies. It's actually kind of the end-all be-all. But that's not the end-all be-all for being environmental. Properly sourcing your food isn't just environmentally sustainable, but also economically sustainable. Locally sourcing supports the entire movement of small farming and the push for more sustainable food production. When you buy locally, you can also ensure that the money you are spending is going directly to the farmer and not a corporation, which is a rising issue in the industry today. Buying food locally has a reduced carbon footprint for many reasons, but mainly is the lack of transportation that leads to reduced carbon emissions. Even more than that, the transportation needs would be far less if people weren't trying to buy blueberries in January. In BC, only 34% of food is produced in province, which means 66% of our produce is imported. Because so much food is imported into countries across the world, in 1 year alone, food miles are responsible for 3 billion tons of carbon being released into the atmosphere. Just so that you can understand that a little, that is the same amount of carbon as about 650 million average cars release in a whole year. The possible effect of collective local sourcing is so grand, yet denies consumers immediate convenience. One last common misconception I'd like to debunk, in case you're still wary of the whole local thing, is that shopping locally does not mean more expensive. Though it often depends on your location, local merchants statistically price their produce slightly lower than conventional shopping. I've tried to be subtle here, but in case you weren't listening for the last 5 minutes, please buy local, it's better and an easy takeaway from today. To be as biased as possible, Applebee also gets to be local, and Apple A is going to be a corporate industrial apple. Local, industrial. While running a large-scale sustainable farm appears daunting, the need for adaptability due to unsustainable practices has led farmers to start to turn towards sustainable agriculture. One mesmerizing example is a mini forest garden in Bec-Houlain, France, where just 1.8 hectares of land is producing over 800 varieties of vegetation, utilizing multi-tier systems, cover cropping, and shrubs as windbreak. A study such as the one done by the French National Institute for Agricultural Research proposed that the work on the farm could easily surpass that of a conventional farm. Meanwhile, Leontino Balbo, after joining his family's sugarcane business in 1986, began to pursue more sustainable practices for his farm. After returning 20 tons of previously unused organic matter to the soil, employing more sustainable vehicle tires to reduce erosion and damage, as well as using alternative fertilizers and pesticides, the farm today produces 30% of the world's organic cane sugar. Worldwide, Saskatchewan farmers have become renowned for their execution in the no-till movement. Like we talked about earlier, tilling is when you cultivate land in order to prepare it for crops, generally with machinery. This transition was made particularly after the 1890s and the 1990s and the 1980s droughts, which left Saskatchewan farming land barren and dry. And miraculously, by 2019, 75% of farmers were completely no-till. What has made their progress so notable is the results of their switch. Farmers went from putting one commercial crop every 2 years to producing one every year, putting them back in the black. One study even showed that the cut to equipment costs alone led to farmers saving $18.94 per acre. Not only that, but they also began to offset their emissions by nearly 95%, sequestering 15.6 million tons of carbon annually. This is actually a big deal, and I didn't want to make another car reference, so just think. They sequestered annually 15.6 million tons of carbon just because they didn't till. Excuses aside, large-scale agriculture doesn't have to be conventional. Out of thousands of examples of sustainable farms, large corporations leave no room for small farms to escalate their environmental techniques. This is the last one. Apple A is going to get a little till. So are apples. I'm not going to go through both all over again, but clearly there's a difference. I wanted you to just see this. Because when you hear pesticides, you probably aren't putting together the fact that all of these other things are probably present too. While the line can sometimes blur, it's not difficult to distinguish between sustainably sourced food and the very products leading to the contamination of these global issues. Agriculture isn't just growing food. It never has been, but today, that's still how it's perceived. Agriculture is lifestyle and connection and learning and teaching and thoughtfulness, and I could go on forever. And you'd think, after looking at all of these things that agriculture and our food embodies, it would be worth fighting for. Everybody is entitled to their own opinion, but I can't help holding out hope for the day that modern agriculture isn't the negative portion of somebody's slideshow, that it's the big part of the story where we get to show how we rose from our mistakes and did better. With our knowledge in recent years and growing confidence in practices, the world has a promising future. It's our understanding of the natural world that can lead us there. It all starts with what we know.
gentlemen, we come to the question
Brad,
and
no.
answer portion.
Brad, no. Brad, no.
Nope.
Brad, no.
No? Okay. No.
Sorry. I would also like to thank a few people for their endless help in my project, starting with my family. I didn't have a photo. Mom and Dad, you were the first people to make the mistake of trying to help me find a topic, but there's no way I would be here without you guys. And thank you to Wyatt and Cash for respecting my privacy on the most basic level and letting me do my work. Jackie, thank you for not ignoring Jen's email after reading how many pages of my essay you would have to read. I could not think of a better advisor, and I'm so grateful for all the insight you have offered. Jessica, I consider it miraculous that you found me time to show me around UBC and show me hope for what really felt like a lost cause. There was nothing better than getting re-excited about my project and learning firsthand about all the progress being made. Oh, Jen. Thank you so much for everything. You're the backbone of this program, no matter how much IPS will try to take credit. And this project is so much more than a TED Talk or a long, long paper or trying to prove you're an overachiever. You supported us through a rite of passage. Thank you. Yay.
Now it's time for the question and answer part of the Masterworks. So the students make their presentation, but it's also a defense. And to begin that, we have questions from Ms. Harper's panel. So I'll pass the mic. This, by the way, when it goes around, is you don't need to speak into it, just hold on to it, and then we can capture it on our stream. Thank you.
Miss Chell, you have done a fantastic, can you change the slide, please?
I think it's kind of cute. You don't like it? We'll go back to there. But now your name's not up.
As I said, you have done a fantastic job of taking a super complex, although some people, and you also once upon a time said, I can't just do farming. You've taken this so far beyond farming, because farming is a huge topic. It's our world, and it is our food. It keeps us alive. So you have made that a really important and clear. You've made your point clear for sure. You are an incredible speaker. You're very cheeky, and you're very funny. So I am super proud to have been your advisor, and you have your little therapy bouquet. That I'm going to need one too. But I do have a question for you.
Okay.
It's a good one. It's an easy one. Can you go back to one of your just last slides?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, yes. There it is. So we went to the UBC Center for Sustainability, and Jessica showed us around, and both of us thought these were super cool little space things spread out in one of the fields. Can you explain what they were doing?
I'd love to. So these lovely little, they kind of look like domes. I'm going to say domes. These domes are used for carbon capture from the soil. So what they do is they flip the domes on top and they seal them, and they go into the ground so that it can't get from underneath. And it captures all of the carbon that just rises up. Then there's this like funky little tube that goes all the way to this like station that's like on that side of the photo. And what it does is I think they get it into like a tube or a vial or some, okay, that's a lie, actually, I have no idea. But they transfer it through this tube that we saw, and then they read how much carbon has risen from the soil in whatever period of time they measured. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So are they comparing different fields?
What I think they might be comparing is tilled and then cover. This was a cover crop field. So I think they were comparing the cover crops compared to the no-till compared to the cover crops and till. Yeah.
Jackie, do you have a question?
Sure. Well, that was amazing.
Thank you.
It was really amazing and so charmingly presented, right? It was really fun to listen to. I'm really interested and curious about how doing all this has affected you, and you know, what has it changed you in any way, or?
Okay, a little bit of story time. I know you don't want to hear it, but my mom used to be called the organic bum by all my friends because she wasn't into like the chemicals and stuff, and I always resented that, truthfully. I felt very jealous of my friends who got to eat, and now and now I'm so grateful that she gave me this pre-warning, I think, in my childhood. I don't think I would have chosen this topic if she hadn't been so on me about getting the organic apples at the grocery store and not the apple A. So I think it's really made me appreciative of what organic and sustainable farming means. And I think it's also made me very conscious of my food and aware of how it affects a bigger thing than me.
Cool.
Pam, do you have a question?
Ms. Chell, I'm so inspired by this presentation, and I know that you and I got to work for a little bit of time back in December and January, and you were really struggling with where to go and what to do. And one of the things, because you had so much you wanted to do, you were just all over the place, and one of the things that you were really pursuing was the chemicals in food, and you were looking for somewhere that would test those foods, and you were really having a hard time, right, finding that.
Yeah.
Can you comment on that? Like, do you think that should be something that is more available?
Yeah, I'd love to. When I first started this project, my big idea was that my action would be, clearly I didn't do it, but that I would test organic produce and non-organic produce and produce in more biodiverse environments and all of these different factors, variables, whatever, and then I would see which one had higher nutrients, and I was really excited about that. But when labs don't really do that for individuals, it's a really big project actually, because you need loads of this produce because you need to find an average, and it's actually quite a big deal to do it, which I didn't realize. But personally, what I was trying to get at was that I believed that food that was grown organically or in a more biodiverse environment would have higher nutritional content just because of how they're accessing all of those microbes.
Which you did
And I did talk
about
about that, how
So-
the different studies, but there's no definitive answer or decision, and everyone's a little on their own side of the bench.
So do you think that should be more pursued, something that?
Absolutely, I think that would be, I think it should be widespread knowledge, if it can't be pursued, at least for people to understand the different viewpoints.
And the second question, I noticed a really interesting poster
Yes.
out in the foyer. Can you comment on that?
Those posters are from my lovely advisor, Jackie Bradley, and Phil, and her husband, Phil, and they brought them from Grafton Gardens, and they have a lot of interesting stuff, actually, and they include a lot of the techniques and stuff that they do at Grafton Gardens, which a lot of us IPS kids have actually been to, and I encourage you to take a look at them because they're actually really interesting. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, questions from the floor today?
Not,
Adrian, way at the back.
not you.
Ms. Chell, that was a great presentation.
Thank you.
We don't normally think of farming as so funny, but well done. So you talk about the nutrients in food being connected to the soil. That's kind of seems obvious connection. But what about the variety? I mean, if we look at apples, or we look at the apples of the earth, potato, that is, we eat like a 2% or 1.5% of the variety of those foods. Do you think the species or the variety of the food could have an impact on what's in it as well, as far as like nutrients?
Personally, I believe that it's best to get the most variety because you'll get the variety of nutrients, but I don't necessarily believe that eating one exotic plant is going to get you. It also depends where you live. I'm going to be honest, I actually didn't research this, but what I can imagine is that the more variety you can get, the more variety of nutrients you can access, and that's obviously very important, and that's why our body often craves new and different foods that we haven't tried before, is because they're trying to access as many diverse nutrients as they can.
Great answer, thank you.
Of course. Not Jura.
Does apple A taste worse than apple B?
Yeah, disgusting. Absolutely awful.
Thank you so much, Ms. Chell. I was wondering, when you talked earlier about monocultures and it providing like a huge glut of food for the world, but then you had that French example. Do you think that if we had more of that kind of intensive, sustainable farming, that we could make as much food in the world for the world?
So Jen made me talk about agriculture in a good light, but it's also really important because it's gotten us where we are today, and we definitely needed that to get past a lot of global barriers. I think now that we have the resources, I think if we are looking at it and focusing in on it, then we can definitely achieve sustainable farming on a large scale. But I think it requires a lot of work, and I think society is definitely a little more pinpoint on other issues and other technological advancements.
Amazing job, Miss Chell. That was absolutely amazing. Like, okay. My mom also presses the idea of just organic fruit and vegetables, very, very organic. But they aren't local. Like, I don't go to the farmer's market to get them. So are the organic foods that we are buying from a superstore or Safeway still like tilled, or how is that process compared to just like the one with pesticides and stuff like that? Because I don't know. All I know is that it's pesticides are on the non-organic.
So another huge component of buying local is actually that organic is more likely to be guaranteed. Organic certified is a big thing. So when you go to the grocery store, your apples will be organic certified, or they won't be. But the problem is that organic certified has these very strict guidelines, and they're starting to incorporate different ideas. I think when I was talking to Jackie, she was like, they don't actually have to be grown in dirt anymore. They just don't have to have pesticides, which is like a huge consumer misunderstanding that we don't know. So while organic is a big umbrella term for no pesticides or stuff, that certification is starting to allow certain kinds of pesticides and fertilizers, and only this weird variety. So when you buy locally, there's this, you're directly talking to the producer. You can say, did you use this? What are your techniques? And I think that's a huge component of eating organically.
Wonderful presentation, Ms. Chell. My question for you is, do you see hope for the future of agriculture? And if so, how do you suggest that others also stay optimistic?
Okay, so one of my favorite people ever, Greta Thunberg, she said once that she wanted adults to start feeling panicking so that they could get something done instead of hopeful. But IPS also brought in these people to get us optimistic about the future of climate change. So it's kind of like whatever toots your own horn, whatever will get you going. I think there's optimism if we can educate a new generation. I think that a lot of the older generations are stuck in a bit of a mindset, and I think if we can start educating them now, I think there's a lot of hope for progress in the future.
I have a question for you, Ms. Chell. As the audience saw, you have no problem telling me what to do. And we've seen that on several occasions, but in all seriousness, I think this is something that we need to take our school and all schools in some sense. What do you think the role of call it grade school education is in this whole process of, I don't know what we're going to call it, but this shift to permaculture, let's say?
I actually sent you a paper on this at the beginning of the year. I don't know if you got to reading that, but I think that while I talk about agriculture, there's also this huge component of preparing food and cooking food, and I think that food as a whole is a very important part of our lifestyle, and it strikes me as weird sometimes that schools teach about like math and like calculus and science, sorry Jen, and like all those crazy things, but then they don't talk about like this basic human need. And then kids come home, even like concession, like guilty, but like we're selling like ice cream bars and stuff, and there's no education or discussion or understanding about these things. And even starting small, like being like, here's like a course you can take from MAP, but I think there needs to be a certain understanding in all schools, but I think as a private school, we have a lot more power to change that curriculum. independence.
I'm so impressed. My name is Charles McNeil, and I can't imagine having the kind of understanding that you have when I was in the 9th grade. And I'm really hopeful for the future with people like you unleashed like this. I spent 32 years working for the United Nations on climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, and I'm embarrassed to say it's only in the last few years that I understood that it's a failed food system that's driving 1/3 of all the greenhouse gas emissions, 80% of all the species extinction, the obesity crisis, the malnutrition crisis. And so I'm just really thrilled that you're putting this attention on this issue, which is just transformative for the world. And my question is, what is your future? What are you going to be doing about this going forward? Because it seems like you have so much to contribute, and I'm so grateful to you for educating this community the way you are.
Thank you. A lot of people have asked me about my future. I don't know. I find this fascinating, and there's no doubt that I would like to explore this further, but I couldn't give you a definitive answer. I know that one of my external advisors works at Grafton Gardens. Another one is at the research center at UBC, and they do carbon capture, and they look at all these data, and they analyze. So I don't know, but there's so much job opportunity in this forte that it would be really interesting to explore that. Yeah.
Ms. Chell, I have a question from your advisor, Jessica, who is watching you online and has all sorts of information about some of the questions too, but I will get to those in a second. She asks, we hear a lot about the carbon climate mitigation impacts of regenerative agriculture, but how does regenerative agriculture help build resilience, and are there potential impacts socially, economically, or culturally?
Do you think I could read that off of there just really quickly? Let me put one sec.
Right there.
Lovely, thank you. Or maybe more simply, we hear a lot about carbon, but how does build resilience in their Okay, so from what I'm understanding, she's asking about how regenerative agriculture builds resilience in a nutshell. Regenerative agriculture is so amazing because it doesn't just practice growing food, it connects itself like the First Nations techniques, and there's a lot of holistic and connection within it. And I think what's so amazing about that is it gives so many people a deeper understanding of literally our earth, which we live on. It's a very large part of our life. And then as well as practicing regenerative agriculture, I mean, there's so many benefits. I could go on, but it's the connection, really. I think that, and when communities come together to build something better for their future, I think there's also a huge social impact there with the connection in that. And then economically, I've talked about the benefits, but I think there's many things. Yeah, so I think socially, I think it has a very big impact.
Yeah, and resilience? Can you speak to that, or do you not want to?
Resilience in what way?
Resilience in our food systems. So that
Oh, yes. So regenerative agriculture, especially food forests and permaculture, follow the natural path of nature. So when we can start working with nature, it relies on a lot less. There's a lot of dependency on human interference. And I think that builds a lot of trust, and I think that'll be passed down through generations, this knowledge, understanding. And I think it can improve our system a lot more if we can make all of our food less dependent on us.
Harper, I was going to ask you, can you say the difference between permaculture and regenerative, and how they're the same, how they're similar?
Yes, I can actually. I looked this up. So I only talked about permaculture, but a lot of my advisors and people I talk to are practicing regenerative. Regenerative agriculture and permaculture are very near similar. From what I understand is permaculture is a lot about the design and the structure. And in my paper, I didn't talk about this here, but people use permaculture actually as a widespread term in architecture, in building ponds, in engineering. It's a way to build with the flow almost, and to understand what's already there and to build around that instead of forcing your way in. Meanwhile, regenerative agriculture is a lot more of a self-sustaining technique, I believe.
We have time for one more question.
I have a question and a comment, but I don't think we have time for the question. Bummer. My comment is this. Ms. Chell, you and your colleagues are doing what Masterworks students are supposed to do. Brad talked yesterday about it's a flip around. For most of the year, the teachers teach all kinds of things to the students. For these couple of days, the students teach us, and you have done a superb job of introducing a topic that's incredibly important in teaching us. So well done.
Thank you.